Welcome back. And we are talking about energy prices now. How can we keep energy affordable? It's been a question that I'm sure many people have been asking over the last year as energy prices have spiked to unprecedented levels. Up until about mid-2021, the weekly futures baseload prices for energy, the weighted average of selected European markets, sat consistently under 50 euros per megawatt hour. Since then, the numbers have spiked considerably, often reaching over 300 euros per megawatt hour. And as we just saw in the graphic, the price spread in both the day-ahead market and the intraday auction have consistently been over 100 euros per megawatt hour since the end of last year. So huge volatility throughout the day, which we haven't really seen before. In fact, wholesale electricity prices went from 77 to 624 euros per megawatt hour within a 7-hour period in August. So we're here to answer the question, what impact does this price volatility have on generators and consumers, and how will it develop in the future? To answer that, we have Philipp Cüppers, who worked at Vattenfall for over 11 years and is currently team lead of energy markets and asset optimization at Vattenfall Hydro Germany. Vattenfall is a leading European energy company, which for more than 100 years has electrified industries, supplied energy to people's homes, and modernized our way of living through innovation and cooperation. Joining him, we also have Başar, who is a leading global business development for demand response solutions, expanding Enel's solution portfolio, focusing on providing holistic energy solutions, working towards decarbonization and increasing resiliency in the new energy system. He's been with Enel since 2016 and been involved in various market entries, new solution launches, and M&A processes. Worked on fundamental analyses of energy markets in 16 countries and advised global clients on energy procurement and demand flexibility strategies. Cem is a mechanical engineer by training, focused on energy with professional experience in building management systems and HVAC industries. He also has a master's in energy science and technology with a focus on energy system analysis, power markets, and energy policies. Thanks for joining us, Cem.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And sorry, Philip, I didn't give you the chance to say hello before. Thanks for joining us as well. Skipped over that.
Good to be with you.
And we have Silvana Tiedemann, who as part of the energy sustainability and infrastructure practice at the Hertie School, Silvana supports governments, utilities, and other private firms to transform the energy system and their business models towards a sustainable future. She has comprehensive expertise on energy policy, renewable energy support schemes, competitive procurement of renewable and auctions, as well as grid integration of e-mobility. She's a board member at the Möckernkiez cooperative, which has built a modern urban neighborhood with a communal and intergenerational housing complex that is ecological, sustainable, barrier-free, and social. Prior to this, she worked as an energy consultant for a number of years. Welcome, Silvana.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good, pleasure to have you. And of course, you've probably noticed the man sitting next to me, Wilhelm. After completing his MBA at the Berlin School of Economics and Law, Willy gained experience at the Federal Foreign Office, Fraunhofer Institute, and a strategic communication consultancy. He then deepened his energy expertise at 50 Hertz, working in strategic market development and energy politics roles for over 8 years. He is now responsible for business development and regulatory affairs at gridX, enabling companies along the energy value chain to connect and control any distributed energy resource. Willy, thank you for joining me here in the studio.
Thank you, Greta.
Great to have our first in-person guest. So let's go straight into the questions. Going to be asking some hard questions today, so looking forward to this discussion. Philip, how can we best leverage fluctuating prices, which I just mentioned before?
Which is kind of the all important question, like heads on, I would say. To be super honest, it's all about like which prices. So we see so many markets interconnected deeply to each other. So you like in your intro talked about day ahead. We see like multiple intraday. We have an auction, we have a continuous trading. We are deeply involved in ancillary services as well, like gaining like a lot of additional traditional products in comparison, like a couple of years ago, where we had like a month or a week-long product. We are now having like 4-hour blocks with 15 minutes auctions, and on top like 4-second settlement. So leveraging it really means in the first move, basically understanding it and kind of like grasping the complexity of it, because there's so much happening. And for us, especially operating hydro power plants, pump storages mainly in Germany for Vattenfall, that's obviously a good thing for us to happen. Volatility is our core business, and we try to be the best we can in all the markets I just mentioned. We have a purely spot focus, so we don't do any kind of like term market hedging whatsoever. So we have like full spot risk. We go full in on intraday. Obviously, we are just not doing intraday purely because, like, volume-wise, with a portfolio of 2.5 gigawatts of installed capacity, like intraday is sometimes not kind of like the place to be initially. But it's very much about kind of understanding everything there, and what we do there, and we as a big utility has a great advantage of having dedicated teams doing dedicated tasks like on their own, and a lot of teams doing like specialized work, which makes it for us as a BU kind of like having a great partner internally with our business area markets, who is doing like all the operational stuff around energy trading. We have great partners at our side to actually do the day-to-day work for us. And the day-to-day work in that case means like actually like optimization trading, all the shift systems they operate for all markets there. And obviously they also develop algos and optimize and digitalize and kind of what just needs to happen, because complexity just like went through the roof from a regulatory perspective, and now also from just understanding prices to the degree it's still possible to do so. So, and especially talking about us at BioHydro Germany, it's really about us having an asset structure behind with a lot of pump storages, which are not kind of like batteries we bought a year ago. So it's not kind of like super predictable. We have like the one and single kind of availability number and the megawatt hour and the energy capacity. It's for me especially, and me like having the opportunity to work together with great people on that, to really find our good next steps there to be available to a market, to offer the flexibility we have. With having different assets, having different capabilities. So we have certain assets which are like super matched to super fast products. We have other assets which are like slower in comparison. Like for energy businesses, it's kind of like a 7-minute ramping thing for like a couple of 100 megawatts. That's still a quick thing, but in comparison, they are kind of like internally at least considered slower. And now we need to do the following. We need to match ever-evolving markets with high numbers of products, high complexity to our internal asset base. And obviously, we try to do the best of it, because that's kind of the idea behind it, obviously. And so for us, it's really about deeply understanding the in-between and even go just one step further, because as I said, we have dedicated teams doing a really, really great job, and we as a kind of like rather small business unit are super thankful to have them on our side, but they always kind of like do their core business. And what was so important for us, like, and we started that 2 years ago, and to be honest, we are not kind of like the Google around, so we are like super digitized and everything is digital and stuff. But 2 years ago we started, and also together with internal IT and being grateful for them, having them as support, we started our kind of like own initiative, like understanding everything just better, and just build our kind of like for our business, our own platform to really know what's happening where and how we can tackle it in the future. Because what we see, like if you look back 2 years ago, you saw like EUA prices like for CO2 go up, and you know, yeah, okay, now base is going up like €3. Okay, cool. Now you see prices and you're saying like, is it the war in Ukraine? Is it gas? Is it availability of nuclear? And is it for the nuclear plants which are actually available, river temperatures? So cooling is hampered. Is it the water levels? Is it less or more AC somewhere or not? And all these interdependencies are driving prices. And for us, especially as also kind of consumer for electricity, and kind of like burning in a kind of weird comparisons there, burning electricity as a commodity to then kind of like bring it back to in the right moment. There are so many things affecting any flexible asset, not just pumps or just batteries, any flexibility out there, demand response, everything. If you look at electricity as kind of the starting point, all the things like what comes from coal markets, from natural gas markets, from CO2, like all commodity markets play a role, demand plays a role, renewables play a role, forecasts play a role. And just to grasp that, that's just an effort we are now underway with a dedicated team for that, to make it just work for us, because we found that the amount of decisions that needs to be taken on a daily basis are so detailed that we also need to be able to understand the market in more detail and provide better information for optimization.
Thanks, Philipp. And Cem, could you provide any insight? There's obviously lots of challenges that Philipp mentioned there, and we don't really know exactly why this is happening. Can you provide some insights into what caused this? How do we get here? And maybe what role electricity market design has played?
Yeah, sure. And that's a very long question. I think Philipp already mentioned that there are so many different reasons to why this happened. And if the conversation goes into, okay, is this because of the current market framework and how the market is designed? I think this conversation would last we can talk for 5 hours and then we still would not have like a definitive conclusion. So I think to summarize my views on that, of course, the market design is one of the reasons why we see these energy prices. Now, does that mean there's something wrong with the energy market design? Not necessarily, because in order to say some market design has like flaws or it is wrong, you need to talk about alternatives. Okay, then what is the right way of doing this? Today, people are talking about, okay, gas prices are impacting the energy, electricity prices, because we have a pay-as-clear market. Like, how do we make the spot electricity prices a little independent from the gas prices? These conversations are not things that we can conclude in like a couple of months. It would take years to understand the impact of alternatives and what we can do. I think what I can say is that the current market is working well. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, but it is working well in terms of providing incentives for more renewables in the system. I think it certainly should be improved in terms of valuing flexibility more by giving better signals at like locational level and becoming more granular, which is something that is already happening through intraday continuous markets, for example. So we would continue seeing price effects like we are experiencing today in the future as well, but we would at least have like safeguarding mechanisms as well that would protect the consumers and that would allow people to, I don't want to use, I don't want to say take advantage, but it is, I can't find a better word for it, take advantage of these high prices and actually transfer that value to other places where we can create long-term solutions so that we do not experience similar things again in the future.
Thanks, Cem. Yeah, difficult question there, but a very, very good answer. Thanks. One thing you mentioned was that we should provide incentives for more renewables. And my question, Silvana, would be, if we do have more renewables, are we passing on the cheaper prices of renewables to consumers? And if we aren't, how can we kind of improve that?
So I think we have to distinguish between two different timeframes here. First is the short term, so hourly, basically, when we see that if we have a lot of renewables, prices are low, which basically the question is, how do we make these price signals visible to the end consumers? And this is the case in some sectors. Industry, for example, normally kind of sees these real-time prices, but also in some countries, Denmark, for example, Spain, Italy, they are further advanced in terms of real-time prices than than Germany, for example. So this is one part of the question. So how do you actually make these short-term price signals and the volatility which we see visible to the end consumers so that they can react to these signals and adjust their demand by shifting, for example, from one hour to another? That's one part of the question. And the other part of the question is, what about the low cost of producing renewables in general? And this is then something which refers more to the long-term market, I would argue. And renewables in the last years are not active on any future markets. Also because of the way the support schemes are designed by governments. And there was a reason for that. The reason was basically everybody wanted to have a lot of security for renewables so that an investment or capital costs are low. And hence, the main idea behind support schemes was that one takes away the long-term price risk from renewables and thereby brings down cost, which was very adequate for the time being. But it also meant that these renewables are not active on any long-term markets. There are no PPAs. There are no PPAs for consumers. And this means that the hedging part of it, the hedging ability of long-term markets is missing in the system. And I think this is a way where future thoughts should be put in also when we talk about the reform of the electricity market sector, of how to do both, like keep the short-term volatility and the price signal, which is needed for the demand response, and at the same time provide some hedging to make sure that we don't have any long-term problems in terms of the electricity prices for the end consumers, which they cannot manage, or for the industry, which would lead to industry leading the European Union or individual countries.
Thanks, Silvana. And when we're talking about renewables, obviously, really, we're seeing an increase in small-scale assets. How can we overcome the barriers that currently exist to leverage the flexibility of small-scale assets?
Yeah, I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that there are many barriers. So that's something I think policymakers often miss. And I think when we look at the barriers, the first one is obvious. We have no uniform rule set in the EU. So among the different member states, other requirements for decentral assets are applying, other markets are available, other incentives are ruling. So that means for companies who want to build products for these markets, it's hard to scale. So we try as gridX to focus on that by building a modular platform so that our customers can choose different modules to build products fitting that market. But still, it's hard to entering the market and fulfilling all the different requirements from our customers' perspective. But even within Germany, for example, it's also not clear that you have one single rule set. All the DSOs have individual requirements for assets. They have other processes for applying to register new assets. So you also cannot really build a really scaling solution across Germany now from scratch. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort to connect to all these DSOs. But I think the most pressing problem is the smart meter rollout. So in most or in almost half of the European countries, the smart meter rollout hasn't started yet. So of course, the Nordics, Italy, Spain, yeah, they have their rollout completed. Almost every household has a smart meter. But countries like Germany, for example, still are in the Stone Age, energy-wise, I would say. And if you see that, for example, in Germany, we have 2 gigawatts of residential battery capacity available, but they have no incentive to be put on markets just because their flexibility cannot be measured. And if you compare it to a peak load of 70, 80 gigawatt, that's a huge number, yeah. So we could already reduce our peak hours, but it's just not incentivized.
Okay, and obviously Smart meter rollout, a big topic. What would you say? How can we speed it up? What is holding us back from it? What can the regulation do, or how can we kind of incentivize it?
In my opinion, I think the idea to have a meter that is not only measuring but also controlling asset, that's the fundamental problem in Germany. So I think in the end we have to really reduce the scope, make it very simple, and then see that we get the meters available and roll them out. I think the government now acknowledges the problem in parts, I guess, and they want to accelerate, but it will still take time to roll it out. And until we have all households connected, I think it's going to cost us another 5 years. But they are still clinging to the idea that the smart meter should be also controlling the assets. So I think that will be also a huge challenge for the upcoming years.
Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about legislation, Philipp, what sort of legislation and also technology is needed to foster customer-centric solutions that also serve the grid?
Which is a tricky combination to kind of like have it customer-centric and also kind of like as an add-on, just makes like super individual with like locally super different. It's just a thing in itself. So to be honest, I have not the one kind of clear policy proposal which is just solving it. I think it's especially a technology thing, because what we see is even if all our dreams would come true regulatory wise, and Wilhelm is kind of like starting off and all his idea will just be future law. It's just a complex thing to do. And so I think that technology is needed to do that and to basically make the jump possible to really use this potential that was just highlighted. By one kind of like bringing the volatility of the market to end consumers, to incentivize them to be part of it, because everybody else who is in the energy business kind of like to a more or lesser extent kind of like optimize yourself for the past couple of years. And there's so much untouched potential there on the customer side. And especially if you want to kind of like combine it with a grid, like a certain local necessity on top of it. There's just no way kind of like someone is doing it on their own at home, just like combining some stuff and here we go. So we definitely need strong technology providers who cover the bridge, maybe come up with kind of like innovative ideas to connect stuff to make smart meter, even kind of like simpler smart meters, kind of like having a broader benefits than initially expected. So it's especially a technology thing from my perspective. And if we wait for the perfect legislation, and obviously we aim for kind of like a level playing field and for lower restrictions on like a market member and European harmonization, that's obviously a given. But I don't think that we come along with a legislation that's kind of like perfect for everything in the next year. But we need to get better as a households kind of like fast. And so I think from my perspective, it's really a technology challenge there. And having kind of you guys in the market is bridging it to an extent.
Thank you. We hope so too. We've had a question from the audience, which is actually relevant to this discussion. When will we see time of use tariffs dominate, and how much value or how many kind of cost savings will they actually deliver to consumers? Maybe Cem, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, no one has a crystal ball, of course, but time of use tariffs will become really important, because even though there are some mechanisms to mimic the wholesale price signals or the market signals to consumers, I think retail tariffs and time of use will play the most important role, giving some level of signals to consumers. So I think in some countries, we already see a lot of time of use. If you go to GB, for example, you would see a lot of time of use tariffs. And I think more countries and more retailers are adapting that. And the savings is really hard to quantify, of course, but it really depends on what kind of consumer you are and in which market you are. But what I can say is that in the past we were seeing ridiculously low savings from time of use tariffs and like load shifting and optimizing the consumption. But more and more every year, I think the savings are becoming more significant to attract consumers to take action. and participate in either load shifting activities or other type of flexibility services that are provided either through their retailers or through independent aggregators to provide grid services.
This is a hot topic amongst the panelists. Philipp, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, just really quick to kind of like add to the question, are we talking like electricity or are we talking grid fees, which is also like a huge driver there. So I'm not 100% certain like what would be kind of like the first big steps there, like kind of like incentivizing people at home. Is it on the grid fee side? Is it on the wholesale side? I'm just not sure about that. But it's also kind of like bring up the next challenge, like where to tackle that. And that's why I said it's kind of like we need to kind of like focus on both there, and that's definitely something we will solve only with technology.
And Silvana, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think it just makes sense to clarify a little bit the difference between time of use and real-time pricing, and also what they are good for. So time of use is normally a price signal which is fixed quite far in advance. So it is the grid operator, for example, fixing grid fees, which are higher in the evening because there's an evening peak, or in countries where you have quite a lot of air conditioning, it is higher during the day, even in the summer month. And so this is very different from a real-time pricing, because the consumers will know then very far in advance that if they change their behavior, they will have some savings. Now, renewables, wind particularly, solar is a little bit different, is not that foreseeable in advance. Like you cannot say that at 12 at noon in August 2023, there will be a high wind influence. You can say that with a higher probability for solar, but not for wind. So I think we do need both, right? We need the time of use tariff for the solar peak, but also for peaks which might potentially come up with new consumers, heat pumps and electric vehicles, because there also we might have these foreseeable peaks. But it's something else for wind, which is after all providing quite a lot of the volume in terms of renewable technologies. So I think that we really need to neatly distinguish between the two of them. And if you have a look at the literature, both for time of use tariffs and for real-time pricing, you do see that the only time where you do have a reaction from the consumers is when the prices are high or the price differentials are high. So I think there it is really a question, how do you redesign end consumer tariffs so that you have both the security of overall electricity prices and a high saving between hours.
Thanks, Silvana. We have another question from the audience. Could dynamic prices also be tied in with local production, for example, wind turbines, to foster public support for renewables? Really, what do you think about that?
I mean, wind turbines, they are often already directly connected to the market via aggregators. But we see it in some markets, and I could also see it, for example, in Germany or other countries that they adopt this, that for small PV systems for household owners, there could be also a dynamic feed-in tariff, maybe coupled to Apex spot day-ahead prices. So there would be an incentive for households to feed in their PV surplus in times where the prices are high, so where the demand is actually high for PV surplus feeding into the grid. That would help the total system because, for example, in the household, the assets like batteries, wall boxes could also then be used in the times where the price is cheaper. So I think there could be an innovation here, and some markets already have these dynamic feed-in tariffs. So it's a viable solution.
Yeah. Silvana, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, just about the ability of financial incentives to increase acceptance. There's quite interesting research from my colleagues from EISS, and they have shown that among the people who are skeptical for wind turbines, benefiting financially would actually increase their acceptance. So I think it does make sense to think about financial benefits for people affected by wind turbines particularly. Now, if it really needs to be tied to the electricity prices, or if you have a direct payment, that's again a different question, because electricity prices can potentially be quite small in terms of direct payment, whereas sometimes if your goal is really to foster the acceptance of the wind turbine, maybe like upfront payments might be both more effective, but also more equitable among the affected people. So I would say yes, financial payments are good to increase acceptance, but I'm not sure to what extent they should be tied to the electricity consumption.
Thanks, Silvana. And on top of dynamic pricing, Cem, are there other ways that we can better respond to the signals that the market is providing?
Yeah, I think I only have a boring response to that, and it's boring because I think it's simple and it's repetitive. I think almost everyone in the market just keeps repeating the same things over and over again, but it is absolutely necessary. We always talk about these signals of the market, and we already talked about how do we mimic those, or how do we transfer those signals from wholesale level to retail level? How do we make them visible to end users, energy consumers? And I think that still plays the key part of like whatever improvements we do at wholesale level, whether changing energy markets, spot markets to give better signals, or creating mechanisms for frequency response or reserve requirements of the system. If they're not reflected to the end users, then it's not very valuable, and it's the old way of thinking, which is very generation centric, and it's not really inclusive of the consumers. So I think one thing is to make sure those price signals, not just price signals, sorry, the market signals are reflected to the consumers. And I think the second is what Willy actually mentioned. It is a bit of standardization. I mean, it doesn't, we don't have to have like the exact same rule sets in every single country. I think everyone acknowledges the fact that the requirements and the way system works would be a little different at each location. But at the same time, there needs to be some common framework for procuring this kind of flexibility and for enabling consumers to participate in such markets or mechanisms. So that needs to be clarified and adopted by all the countries. I think those would be the two important big changes that need to happen so that consumers are getting more active in the markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Cem. We've had another question from the audience asking about peer-to-peer trading, whether it can offer a feasible way to lower energy prices and realize savings on grid fees. Willy, what do you think?
I guess yes, yeah. There's also already a regulation by the European Commission that every member state should implement these rule sets on peer-to-peer trading, energy communities, to enhance the energy exchange between prosumers, generators, and consumers within the same distribution grid. Some countries have adopted these rules, like, for example, Austria, Portugal, but others have not. And that's exactly what Cem already repeated also, is that there's a different rule set in each country still, and that's what's still the problem.
So should we have the same rules for every country?
I think we should aim for that, for harmonization. I acknowledge that there is some historic dependencies that we not can overcome all the individual systems within a day, changing everything, but we should step by step aiming for more harmonization within the EU.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have an opinion on that? Nope. Oh yeah, Cem, go for it.
Yeah, I can just add something to that. I think peer-to-peer trading is very important, yes, but we also need to consider that once peer-to-peer trading is allowed, also consumers need to be allowed to optimize what they are doing at any given time in the system. So because peer-to-peer trading alone would sometimes incentivize certain, let's say, energy communities or local producers or even local, like consumers themselves, to behave in the opposite direction of the market needs. So in that sense, it is very important if the energy communities are introduced and adopted by the countries, energy communities should also be given access to wholesale markets and should be able to make decisions having the right prices and the right market signals between, okay, am I producing this power for my own community? Does it make more sense to sell this energy to my neighbor, or does it make more sense to use this energy for, national requirements of the transmission system or even distribution system? So that needs of harmony between different markets is also absolutely necessary if we are talking about building an efficient peer-to-peer trading mechanism.
Mm-hmm. We've had a follow-up question from an audience member, Michael. What's holding back regulators? He said, as far as I know, P2P trading is only pilot project in Austria so far. Billy?
Yeah, what's holding back regulators? I could only guess, but I think the Austrian example is that they just introduced the legislative framework for communities last year. So it now takes time for the market to innovate. We have also one partner in Austria who builds a solution with us for energy communities, but it just takes time to build the right product, to bring it to the market. And we will see that in the next month and years really taking off, I guess. Yeah, on the question of what is holding them back, I think it's each country has already a very complex rule set. For example, Germany. And if you add now such a new model, there will be so many different things you have to consider. And I think the biggest fear from the regulators is always that someone might be able to have huge windfall profits. And that is their biggest fear, to have some headlines where the media is posting, now we have a rule set and someone can really gain a lot of money. So I think that's why they're always a bit cautious. That's just my personal guess.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And do you think there was something in the Austrian landscape that made it a little bit easier to implement the regulation for P2P trading there? Or was it just they made that step and they kind of looked to the future?
I think it depended on the government, and the Greens at the time pushed it pretty hard. And I think, besides that, we can see that the Austrian government is in all parts of the energy business constantly trying to bring forward their framework and to simplify it. And so I think it's a general approach of the government. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. And when we're talking about legislation, Silvana, obviously, at the moment, it's a huge challenge for governments to assist struggling households to pay for their energy bills, but at the same time, ensure that we're continuing decarbonisation and advancing the energy transition. How can we kind of do both at the same time?
Yeah, so I think there are three options which can be done in order to find a solution to this specific crisis. So one is that households are incentivized to conserve energy. The other one is that they are incentivized to be more efficient. And the last one is to shift loads. These are all payments. These would all be payments which are connected to one of these actions which the consumer takes. Now, obviously, you could also have just lump sum payments, right? But so if we say, like, you want to have lump sum payments which are connected to something, then let's say, for example, in terms of conserving energy, that would be really like trying to convince people to consume less, heat one room less, switch off your lights when you don't need them. There are programs out there which are built on energy saving firmware, for example, where you say, okay, it makes sense that you really, really conserve and you consume less. The second is that you consume more efficient. So the standard example would be to switch to replace your light bulbs or to buy a more efficient washing machines. So, and I think there, what is not very much discussed, but what is really a problem for particularly poorer households is that they just don't have the funds available to do these investments. And I think there are particularly grid operators, but energy suppliers out there which already have experience with programs to subsidize the buying more efficient appliances. And I somehow find it strange that there's not much talk about that and how to accelerate and advance these programs, because they do make sense, particularly for poorer households. And then last but not least, when it comes to shifting the load, we are back again to the same question which we had before. Now there is that it makes sense to actually have a price signal there. And I'm personally quite skeptical about all of the initiatives to reduce the volatility or to cap the prices, because they would particularly take away these signals. And let me just end on some of the research which I'm currently doing, because some people tell me, okay, this hypothetical option maybe in the future that people will adjust their consumption based on the renewable energy in feed or the prices, and that's actually not true. So I have a look at the Danish energy sector, which is special because the prices are quite high, among the highest for the end consumers as well right now in the crisis. And we do see that people change their consumption from 1 hour to another. They shift the load, and they do so more right now than they did before the crisis. So actually the load shifting is in itself a way to save on the energy bill as well. And it is a form of a crisis response. So all that to say, I think that lump sum payments, maybe lump sum payments conditional on conservation, efficient or shifting behavior are the way to go forward, and price caps can have quite detrimental impacts.
We'll definitely get to price caps in a second, but we've had a question from the audience, which I'll direct towards Cem. How do the initiatives to keep energy prices low and advance the transition to a sustainable system compare across different European countries?
Wow, I think there are a lot of, so this is a hard question, because there is the first central interventions, like the suggestions by the EU Commission, and then there are some local initiatives that the countries are taking, and they're trying to solve this problem. And even the central interventions are interpreted in a different way by countries sometimes, and the initiatives that they are proposing are different. I think what I can say is that all the European countries, as far as I see, are taking the demand reduction, like the overall demand reduction requirements, very seriously, and they are coming up with different ways of doing that. There are some markets like Spain, for example, which published a royal decree to start a new demand response program, which was, I would say, very rushed. I think the thinking was good and it was in the right direction, absolutely, but there was simply not enough time to create a great mechanism or framework. And then there are some other countries that are trying to incentivize consumers to go through like energy efficiency measures, like to reduce their demand in the long term. I think there's a bigger, what I can say overall in Europe is that there's a bigger focus now on both explicit mechanisms, so given direct exposures to consumers to get incentivized for reducing their demand, but also I think retailers are under a lot of pressure to reflect a right kind of pricing in their tariffs, so that they give a reason to people to switch their load and reduce maybe peak consumption.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Cem. Willy, you were nodding very vehemently at the fact that Spain rushed some of their legislation. I mean, don't we need to act quickly? How can
that's why I was a bit confused. You said that all the countries take it seriously. I haven't heard a good proposal from the German government, for example, or from some others too. So reducing the peak load or the peak consumption by 5% is the goal, and it was communicated in September. So we still don't have proposals on how we want to do this, and now it's getting colder and colder. So I think it's time is running. And what I expect is that smaller consumers, residential households, will not be able to profit simply because the smart meters are not there. And I think they will in the end make it necessary that you can measure the flexibility you provide or the peak consumption reduction. So I think all the small users will be out of this game.
Mm-hmm. And Silvana, before you mentioned price caps, and on an EU level, the EU Commission has proposed some emergency intervention to tackle recent dramatic price rises. One of the measures is a temporary revenue cap on infra-marginal electricity producers. Philipp, maybe you would want to start with this. What impact will this have, and how might it distort the market?
It's actually hard to predict due to the fact that there will be kind of like national implementation of European decision-making processes, which in the beginning were not the transparent ones. So we are overall a bit hesitant about it, kind of like, because we think we have a couple of things where we see like energy efficiency. It should be first there. We should enable new fossil-free renewable capacity. We need a lot more flexibility on the demand side as well as kind of like on the asset side as well. And one strong thing for us is still transmission risk, because we see such a divided picture in Europe that we think a stronger harmonization, be it on kind of like rules and regulations on specific things to do certain business cases on a household level or stuff, or like the general market approach. It's just necessary to have some common ground there. And the main issue is we want so many things right now, and by taking away the incentive to do it, I don't think necessarily that there's a perfect step to do so. Because what we are seeing right now are very high prices, and obviously, and of course Vattenfall agrees to that, like very vulnerable groups needs to be viewed from a different perspective in the overall energy market. But we have very well functioning markets with strong price signals, and strong price signals will bring us quicker and earlier to the point where we want to be than weak price signals. So if we do that right now, we will definitely have some market impact just by kind of like implementing it, doing like an additional step of settlement. Where is it actually happening, like this burden wise? And it brings me back to kind of what you said before. We will be less in a need to help people if they can just participate. If you get just paid more for your PV at home because prices are high, you probably need less subsidy because your prices are higher. So it's all an interconnected system, and we just need to think in this interconnected way much more, instead of just doing like nation by nation interventions on markets, and some think 180 is a good number, some others are thinking 150 is a good number with a margin on it. So yeah, we are a bit reluctant on that side. We think there are like better ways to do it. Vulnerable groups kind of like side of it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Philipp. Chen, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think one thing I would add is that it's from timing wise, I think this was, I mean, this is hindsight 2020, but I think a lot of people were talking about this risk, this electricity price risk, the local and EU level dependencies on gas prices for a very long time, and asking to come up with a solution. And unfortunately, it usually takes a shock to the system to respond and actually start looking for solutions. And this was the shock, and now people are trying to make really fast decisions because they are needed, but they are not always the best solutions in the long term. So I think the price cap, for example, is, I understand where it is coming from, but at the same time, it is a distortion in the market, and the long-term implications are not very predictable. It certainly reduces, there's some incentive for renewable investments, for example, and it can distort the market prices a little bit, although the price cap doesn't really change how the spot electricity market clearing price will end up. So I think the long-term impact is really unpredictable. That's the key part. And again, we also need to look at the alternatives. Okay, what could have you done? And I think there were some proposals by Greece and by REMA in GB talking about green power pools, splitting the markets, or like long-term CFDs. But even also those solutions have a lot of downsides in terms of liquidity, in terms of competition, giving market power to some participants. So I think it is really hard to say what kind of impact this will have in the long term. But again, I kind of understand where it comes from in terms of finding some short-term solutions to protect consumers.
Yeah, definitely difficult to balance those. Silvana, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think one issue which these interventions will bring up is the debate about markets that trigger the investment into new capacities or capacity markets. And I think in the past decade, the somehow European consensus was that the energy-only market can trigger sufficient investments into new capacities that are needed for peak demand. Now, also before the crisis, this consensus was somehow changing when new capacity markets being introduced, for example, in Belgium, under the new legislation from the European Union. But I think now it will be very difficult to argue that high prices will occur. Politicians will basically allow these high prices to send the signals which are needed for triggering investments. So even though we don't see this debate right now, I think it will come up in 2023, and it will be, and the arguments will be very different than before the crisis.
Philipp, you wanted to make a point on that?
I just wanted to add one aspect to what Sam said, because we're having so much long-term impact, as you said, but from a short-term solution. And it's just like we are hampering so much long-term effort we would like to do there. And there needs to be so much change. And if we just intervene by a short-term measure right now, and it is limited from a time perspective, and it should be that way, because if you just do it, that's kind of like the new market. That's probably not a good thing to do. So if there is a need from a European level to actually do it as short as possible. And there's just a short-term fix for maybe a short-term problem, but just hampering so much in the long term. And that really brings me to the point that we need to act on it from a holistic perspective. And then sometimes, yeah, you want to be quick, but just do it right is sometimes just like a couple of days will not make the difference there. And just like better legislation is just better legislation. So yeah, that's just one point I wanted to make.
Thanks. We only have a few minutes left, but we still have some questions from the audience. The first one is from Kai. Have utilities in countries like Italy managed to build new or additional business models based on smart meters? And if they don't need to earn every dollar with selling energy, this might be beneficial for prices as well. Billy, what do you think?
Actually, honestly, I don't have much insight into all the business models there, so I have no clear overview. But I think the first benefit I have seen in many markets with smart meter is that the consumers have actual insight on their consumption, real time or historical analysis on when they consume most, even with what appliances, and that really helps already to create awareness and maybe also to reduce energy consumption or shift it.
Yeah, we've talked a lot in the other panels actually about how transparency really changes behavior and how important that is as a first step, particularly for prosumers. We'll go straight into the second question from Michael. Will only consumers with big flexibilities benefit from this? Philipp, what do you think?
Like what does mean big? Kind of like gigawatt wise big, like we are there. So we will do different stuff then. I would say there is a huge potential from a consumer perspective also with small scale flexibility. Because if you from an operational perspective just standardize, it's just getting bigger and bigger, and there's not so much different if you do it the right way between big flexibility and a lot flexibility. And we have obviously the benefit of like reacting very quickly with a lot of colleagues working on stuff, on regulatory changes, and we are kind of like ready day one if something changes, which is not necessarily something you could do if there's like, this is less of your business focus. But I think we should strive for a point where flexibility is just helping the system, and whoever is providing it should be very welcome on that marketplace. And I don't think that there's a huge difference. Obviously, kind of like a few special thingies will be probably kind of like reserved for the bigger players in the market, but kind of like the main business things, like the interesting part of the business, it should be and will be, especially if we work on solutions like we're talking about here, and it will be also available to smaller scale. Even
Silvana, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I'm afraid I need to be a little bit more skeptical about that. So I don't think that early transparency helps to bring about the value for the end consumers. So there are studies, for example, from Spain. They switched 5 years ago to real-time pricing, where literally everybody needs to be on a real-time pricing contract, and we actually don't see any change in behavior from both the transparency and the price signal. And this is obviously true for small-scale consumers, but so I think it needs to be a little bit more tailored than that, and utilities do need to come up with more, with more adequate business model, or even more adequate way of talking to end consumers than just replicating what has been there in the industry. Because also from behavioral economics, we know that the kind of rational agent, which is just optimizing based on demand, it's just not very applicable to small scale consumers. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of room for creativity there.
Yeah, absolutely. We've just about run out of time, but Philipp, do you want to add one final thought to that?
Yes, it's very important to not look at just tariffs, because if you just switch your tariff and get like 8,670 kind of like small bills a year, that's not changing behavior. You need to be kind of like able to use it with actually kind of like doing stuff every day. So there needs to be a lot of automation, a lot of digital solutions, a lot of technologies there in place to make you able to participate, but not really like pressing buttons somewhere. So it's really a bundle of things that needs to happen there. But I think there's a lot of potential, and we should strive to reach that goal.
Thank you so much, Philipp. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I think Cem mentioned at the beginning we could talk for 5 hours on this topic at least. But I think we covered a lot of ground today in the last hour. So thank you all so much for joining me. It was an absolute pleasure. And we'll be back in 2 minutes talking about scaling EV charging infrastructure.